I'm 64, a mother, and last weekend my son smiled, then shoved me off a lighthouse. As I hit the ledge, my husband breathed, "Play dead." We did. And that's when we heard it. "If you'd signed, like Nia," he hissed. Who is Nia to him now? Why did a nurse freeze and a hidden recorder light up? Tonight I'll show you the photos they staged, the bolt they planned, and the lie they rehearsed. "We're the victims," they said. Not anymore. I still wake before the ferry horn, though I retired from the ticket window last spring. Habit is its own tide, pulling me out of bed before the gulls begin their arguments over the pier. From our porch I can see the decommissioned lighthouse across the channel, a stone ribcage with a ceremonial blink that survives out of politeness. Leon says it comforts him. I think it warns me. I am 64, wife, mother, keeper of bookings and towels, and the kind of islander who knows which knot will hold in a storm and which knot lies. Our guest house has the stubborn grace of a boat pulled onto land. The floors remember every footstep, and the windows remember everyone who left. I keep 2 ledgers, the public register that smells of lemon polish, and the cloth-bound books my mother began when the world was priced in coins and favors. I hide those cloth-bound books behind the alto hymnals at the choir hall, where gossip cannot follow numbers. The deed to Blackcap Lighthouse lives in the desk drawer under spare batteries, a folded certificate nobody on the mainland believes matters anymore. The harbor lease sits beside it, signed in blue ink, the revenue that keeps the heater honest each winter. I touch both papers the way other people touch rosary beads. I say a small practical prayer. Let us be allowed to age here without someone moving the furniture of our lives. At 9, Julian's car purrs into the gravel as if the driveway were a showroom. He brings Sloane and 2 lattes I did not request. "For my favorite coastal icon," she says, posing me with the mug, her thumb tapping a camera app that overlays price tags on memories. "We should talk about modernizing your estate plan," Julian adds, light as foam. "Less paperwork for you, more safety. I'll carry it." "We are fine," I answer, aware that my voice can sound like an oar striking the side of a boat. Help without consent is control. Sloane drifts through the parlor, letting her lens linger on the teak chest my grandmother polished with coconut oil and patience. "Don't leave money on a dead rock, Amara," she murmurs, smiling with teeth that never learned island coffee. "This house can fund a very gentle future." After they leave, I carry the mugs to the sink and watch the foam slide into the drain like a promise I am not taking. Leon returns from the marina smelling of rain and rope. He peers through the window toward Blackcap, that old tower squatting on the outer rock with its polite little blink. "Jules wants to help," he says, drying his hands on a towel that has seen more storms than most romances. "He wants to carry paperwork. Is that so terrible?" "It is when the backpack is my life," I answer. He kisses my temple, and I feel him hesitate there, as if his thoughts were a ship nosing for a berth. In the afternoon, I walk to the choir hall with a bag of sheet music and the ledgers tucked under a sweater. Harriet, who teaches altos to breathe like bellows, lifts an eyebrow when she sees the cloth-bound books. "You still keeping the truth where people sing?" she asks. "Numbers don't gossip," I say, sliding the ledgers behind the hymnals. "They only tell you who is drinking from your well." Harriet lowers her voice. "Predators purr before they bite, Amara. Watch the smiles." That evening, Sloane returns alone with a borrowed smile and a "just thought I'd drop these off" wave. She places a stack of glossy brochures on the table, then leaves my phone on the counter with a trail of open tabs like wet footprints. Sunlit condos with white sofas, elevator lobbies perfumed with citrus, a pool where no one has a scar. Amenities, she says. Low maintenance. Think of the stairs here. I think of my boots by the door, I tell her. They have salt in them, and I am not done needing that. You read as classic coastal, she purrs, shooting another portrait of me against the kitchen window. Buyers eat that up. I am not for sale, I say. The house is not for sale. The story is not for sale. She laughs lightly, the way people do when they believe resistance is quaint. When the door closes, the kitchen keeps the smell of her perfume like a lecture I did not attend. Julian returns the next morning with a folder labeled "Safety" in block letters, the way children label monsters to convince themselves they can be contained. "Let me carry the paperwork, Mom," he says, soft, quick, practiced. I know this world. I'll make sure you have every protection. You want access, I answer. You want to be the door and the key. Leon fidgets with the mail. He slides the harbor lease back under the batteries, as if paper could be hidden from intention. He's trying, Leon says. Trying to do right. Doing right begins with asking. I tell them both. Not with filling out forms that make me small. Sloane studies my face as if she were fitting me for a frame. We love you, she says. We want to make things easier. Easier for whom? I ask. She does not answer. On Sunday, we eat fish stew at the small table, and Leon talks about bulbs and batteries, the quiet language of maintenance. He once kept the tower alive through storms that threw stones as big as fists. I kept the light, he says, eyes on the window. Sometimes I kept our home dark. I look at him, but he has already turned away, tightening a screw that does not need tightening. Sloane drops by with tulips that look like exclamation points and a voice that edits every room. She asks if we have any photographs of us together in front of the house. It helps the narrative, she explains. We could do an anniversary photo at Blackcap. The phrase drops into the kitchen like a coin into a deep jar. Leon laughs, but the sound is hollow, a shell on a windowsill. Maybe next week, he says. Julian tilts his head, a gesture he inherited from his father and turned into salesmanship. Sunset, Mom, he says. I'll bring a harness. I'm not stupid. That night the island throws a clean wind against the house, and the banister answers with its old creak, reminding me that my knees have started speaking up. I know what Sloane would say about stairs and risk and liability. I also know the shape of my boots by the door and the way salt dries on leather like a map of where I have been allowed to live. In bed, I listen to Leon breathe and wonder what he has kept from me to keep peace with someone else. Morning brings Harriet with lemons and a look I trust. Heard you have a photographer nesting, she says, moving the curtains as if to air the room of words. Just remember, predators purr before they bite. I am remembering, I tell her. I am also making my own record. Before dusk, I open the desk drawer and lay the Lighthouse deed beside the harbor lease, like two passports that insist on our names. I touch them, then tuck the ledger into my bag for choir, a small act of custody. When the phone pings, it is Julian, a heart, a lighthouse, and the words anniversary photo. I stare at the screen until the ceremonial blink arrives across the water and lands in our window like a warning tonight. We will choose the weather, I say to the empty room. We will choose the truth when it comes. Sloane arrived at noon with a tablet hugged to her ribs like a hymn book and a smile that tried to pass as kindness. She cleared a square on the kitchen table, nudged aside the breadboard as if bread were clutter, and opened a carousel of glossy apartments. Sun bounced off white sofas, glass balustrades, stainless elevators. A finger tap summoned a video of someone wheeling a suitcase across a silent lobby lined with ficus trees. Downsizing tours, she announced, angling the screen toward me and Leon. Amenities, security, no stairs, no drafts. Imagine waking without the fairy horn. I set my palms on the wood that remembers our family's elbows and said, "We already wake where we belong." Sloane's thumb swiped again. A glittering pool shrugged under skylights. "Salt water without the mess," she cooed. Leon watched without committing, the way he watches small craft in a tricky tide. I felt the old guest house breathe around us, a lung that knows work. In the reflection on the tablet, I saw my face squared like a listing photo, backlit and labeled. I tipped the screen gently back toward her. "I have seen lobbies," I said. "They do not know my name." She pivoted to money, because people like Sloane believe numbers will unbolt whatever love refuses. Monthly fees cover everything: concierge, recycling, even someone to knock at your door if you forget a pill. You could sell this place at a peak. She let the camera pan my kitchen like a realtor's eye. "Consider maintenance," she added. "Consider stairs, liability, winters." I rested my hand on the lip of the sink, where sea glass dries in a jar. "I consider our life," I said. "And the neighbors who know our stove by smell," Leon coughed, the non-committal kind. When she slid a manila folder across the table, I felt the room tilt a degree. Inside sat forms with our names marching down the margins in a font too cheerful. Just drafts, Sloane said. Powers of attorney. Purely precautionary, so Julian can act fast if a crisis happens. The first page called me Amara da Silva, a name I have not used in 40 years. The apostrophe leaned the wrong direction. I stared at those wrong letters until they blurred. It's D'Souza, I said, calm as a dock. My maiden name is Silva, and no one here is an apostrophe. Sloane's smile did not falter. Typos, she shrugged. Templates are messy. We'll fix it. She touched the page as if correcting it by caress. I slid the folder back toward her side of the border. A poe makes me a guest in my own life, I said. The line landed with the thud of something true. Her expression cooled a degree. It's not control, it's care. She made care sound like a fresh paint smell. Heady, sealing, a little suffocating. Leon cleared his throat and said nothing. In our house, silence is never empty. It is full of decisions. After Sloane left to grab a better template, I phoned our lawyer from the pantry, where the potatoes and I could listen in peace. He answered on the third ring, voice amiable and vague, the way professionals sound when they are massaging the edges of something they should put down. I asked whether he had prepared any documents for Julian to present. He said the word drafts 3 times, like a buoy you hang onto when you do not intend to swim. Nothing filed, he assured me. Just options, in case. Families appreciate options. So do salespeople, I answered. Before I hung up, I asked him to spell my maiden name. He hesitated, then tried the apostrophe again, backwards. Silva, I said. No punctuation. The punctuation came later when I married Leon. He made a note he hoped would sound like responsibility. I set the phone down and let the shelf cool my hands. Harriet called in that hour, as if the island had texted her. Tea? She asked. Advice, I said. We sat on the step while the tide dragged its blue skirts along the pilings. Predators purr before they bite, she reminded me. Hear it yet? I hear a lullaby with teeth, I told her. She looked at the house, at the ledgers I had not shown her, but she knew existed in the way old friends know the footprint of your cupboard. Their dressing control is care, she said. Keep your coat buttoned. After she left, Leon came in with a coil of line looped around his elbow, as if habit were a life preserver. He set it down, and the kitchen filled with the smell of rain and rope and the sea learning our names. You were hard on Sloane, he offered, not looking up. I was precise, I said. There's a difference. He fussed with the coil, making an unnecessary neatness. Julian just wants a plan. Plans are honest when they begin with questions, I replied. Today began with answers already typed. I tapped the folder on the counter, the one that smelled faintly of toner and impatience. A poa makes me a guest in my own life. Leon winced, not at the sentence but at the truth, the way men who fix things flinch when the break is theirs. He brought a harness, he said weakly, as if a strap could replace trust. Julian arrived before dusk as if summoned by his own mention, carrying a Cordura bag with a sticker that read Pro Gear. He unzipped it and produced a bright new harness, tags fluttering like paper fish. Don't freak out, he grinned. Visual aid. Shows I'm thinking safety. He spun the buckles toward me like a magician expecting applause. For once, let me be the adult. I looked at the tags and thought of all the things that masquerade as proofs. Adults return what doesn't belong to them, I said. And ask before handling the family spine. He laughed, too loud. He set the harness on the chair where Nia used to paint birthday banners, and for a second, the room blinked between then and now like the Lighthouse's ceremonial eye. We should take that anniversary photo at Black Cap, he said, casual, rehearsed. Golden hour, before the wind turns. I'll anchor you. We'll keep to the middle of the catwalk. He said it as if maps obey mouths. Sloane, arriving without knocking, lifted her phone. I'll shoot, she said brightly. Wind gives hair texture. Cinematic. Leon nodded too quickly, almost grateful to be told what to feel. I watched, inventorying angles. We are not signing anything, I said, planting the sentence between us like a boundary stone. Not POA drafts, not sale agreements, not a forwarding address. We will choose our weather. Julian's smile narrowed but did not break. You're overthinking, Mom. This is logistics. This is custody, I replied. Of our lives. Sloane stepped in with balm. It's not control, it's care. I almost admired her commitment to her line. Care asks, control assumes, I said. Leon rubbed his thumb along the tabletop's edge and offered a compromise no one had asked for. We can still do the photo. The word still did a small violence to the air. I studied his profile, the familiar seam at his temple where sun and years had stitched him. You just agreed we would choose whether, I said. He met my eyes for a moment and then looked down, as if the wood grain had discovered a secret. It'll mean something to him, he murmured. The hymn covered a multitude of aches in our house. Meaning isn't a safety rail, I answered. It breaks when leaned on. Julian began composing a text thread right there, an invitation masquerading as consensus, thumbs clacking confidence. My phone buzzed on the counter, a lighthouse emoji, a camera emoji, the words Blackcap Golden Hour, Saturday, plus a location pin and a calendar button that wanted permission to mark us. I let it vibrate once more before I tapped, except for one reason only, to put a stamp on the thing that would try to bury us. Time, place, sender, recipients. Later, if later existed, no one could say the day had been accidental. I'll bring the harness, Julian added. Sloane sent a heart and a wind icon and wrote, texture. I replied with one word, weather. I would choose it, and I would witness. At the choir hall, I unlocked the storage cupboard and slid the cloth-bound ledgers onto the folding table, the dust motes lifting like a small congregation. Harriet was early, tuning the altos, but she let my quiet spread without questions. Numbers don't lie. People do, I told the first page, and began reconciling bookings against deposits. Every room this spring had paid on time. The cash drawer matched the nightly slips. The bank app showed nothing hungry chewing at the edges. I ran a finger down the columns my mother once kept in pencil, debt and trust stacked neatly like clean sheets. Solid, I said aloud, because sometimes hearing a word pins it to the table. Whoever thinks we need a guardian isn't reading the books, he's reading his reflection. I slid the ledgers back into their cloth sleeves and reached for the drawer where we keep spare envelopes and ancient rubber bands. Under the stack lay 3 envelopes addressed to Harbor Cask Holdings, tidy block letters in Leon's careful hand. The return address was ours, the stamps were recent, the corners were pressed flat the way Leon presses guilt. I did not open them. I photographed them, date and time showing, and put them back so memory could not accuse me of dramatics. Harbor Cask Holdings tasted of varnish and secrecy. At the bank, I asked for printed statements because paper refuses to wink. The teller with the sailor earrings smiled the training smile. We encourage digital, Mrs. D'Souza. I encourage clarity, I said, and slid my ID across the counter like a flag. She printed the last 2 months and stapled them at a slant. Line by line, I traced deposits from guests, transfers to utilities, taxes, repairs, and then a small recurring payment to Harbor Cask Holdings. It wasn't large, but it was regular. It moved like a crab you only notice when the sand slides. Vendor? I asked. The teller consulted a screen as blank as a trimmed hedge. Registered management entity, she recited. Authorized signer Leon D'Souza. I nodded in that island, way that means I will not make a scene in public, and I will not forget. From the bench outside I called the lawyer again, watching tourists practice seagull noises. He said there were drafts. Yes, only drafts. Nothing had been filed. Families appreciate readiness. Language was fluid. Signatures could wait. I wrote his phrases in my pocket notebook exactly as they fell out of his mouth. Drafts. Nothing filed. Fluid. Wait. Words are hardware. You can weigh them for quality. Julian suggested we drive to Blackcap in the late afternoon to check the view before Saturday, as if vistas spoiled like milk. Sloane brought a satchel with a camera, a spare battery, and a notebook that looked like makeup but open to bullets, wide of catwalk, hands on rail, chin up, profile, bolt detail. I pretended not to see and stored the list under the word premeditation. We took the path that threads the scrub juniper, thrift, and thrift's stubborn purple bells until the catwalk showed itself like a ribbon hammered onto stone. The tide hissed below, spitting at the rock the way critics spit at a truth they cannot bend. Leon pointed out weather coming from the west. The low ceiling of cloud flattened the light into something metallic. I kept a teacher's inventory. Slick lichen, loose shale, gull droppings where a boot could skate, bolts anchoring the rail at intervals. Halfway along I crouched and found one bolt with a shy bend, a bow toward the sea as if it had tried to look at the horizon too long, not loose, not failing, just bent. I touched it, felt the firmness, then took a photo with the phone Sloane hates because it refuses to beautify sorrow. Sloane leaned over my shoulder and tutted. "We'll avoid that rail," she said, snapping a close-up of the very bolt, her lens inhaling it like a story seed. Then she backed me toward the middle. "Step back one more, let the sea halo you." Her finger seemed to press the shutter, but I heard nothing, no mechanical tick, only wind. She changed angles without shooting, then lowered the camera and jotted a line in the notebook with a quick, cosmetic flourish. Behind us, Leon and Julian stood in a pocket of quiet that wasn't quiet. Their voices were low but had the pressure of weather. I couldn't hear words, only tones. Julian's smooth, appeasing, then clipped. Leon's steady, then pleading, then something that sounded like surrender. When they noticed me watching, they both smiled a fraction too fast. We walked the catwalk to the lantern room door and back, my brain drawing a map without permission, where to place a boot, where to avoid the salt-polished rail, where the wind funnels into a shove. Sloane narrated as if training a drone. 2 more steps, chin up, eyes to horizon. Wonderful, I've got it. But the camera did not tally clicks. It tallied positions. When she thought I wasn't looking, she photographed the bolt again, and the base plate, and the plaque that gives the tower's serial number. She even took a wide shot of the rail line from a crouch that would later make an engineer's mouth twitch. Back on the path, the scrub hid us from the sea and delivered us to our own breath. I fell in beside Leon and kept my voice level. What is Harbor Cask Holdings, and why is our return address on their envelopes? He flinched so slightly a stranger wouldn't see it. "A management outfit," he said. "Just to streamline some maintenance bills. It's nothing." "And the payments from our account?" I asked. "Regular, small, and secret." He looked at the path as if a helpful answer might sprout there like thrift. "Drafts," he said, borrowing the lawyer's buoy. "Nothing filed." Then, brittle, he added. "Next week. No risks. We'll wait for fair weather for the photo." His mouth said patience. His eyes said someone else's deadline. "We agreed to choose the weather," I reminded him. "We did not agree to turn our lives into a catalog spread." He nodded like a man trying not to spill a cup he didn't order. "It will mean a lot to him." "Meaning isn't a safety rail," I said. It gives way when leaned on. Julian caught up and draped an arm over Leon's shoulders, as if they were still 2 boys who believed cliffs always choose mercy. "Mom," he said, bright, "don't worry. Saturday will be gorgeous. I checked the tide and the wind. Golden." The word golden rhymed with glib. Back home, Sloane spread her notebook on the table under the pretense of wiping the lens. I stepped to the sink and turned, and in that sideways glance I saw her bullets again. Wide, hands on rail, chin up, profile, bolt detail, and a new one, underlined, parent center. Son back. Shot list, I thought, not family list. A scaffold for a story where the ending was chosen first. She snapped the notebook shut when she noticed my eyes. "Just making sure we don't forget moments," she said, as if moments needed choreography. That night, after Leon fell into the kind of sleep that pretends to be peace, I opened the daybook and did the guest house math again. Bookings solid, deposits present, repairs scheduled, taxes current. I wrote in the margin, "Numbers don't lie, people do." Then I wrote, "Harbor Cask Holdings ask Leon in daylight, call bank manager, call lawyer, photograph everything." Morning brought a milk glass sky and the kind of wind that makes flags think twice. Julian texted a string of suns, Sloane texted a gust icon, and the word texture. I texted back, "Weather is a decision." Then I put the phone face down and watched Leon coil and uncoil the same piece of line until it looked sorry for him. "What are you not telling me?" I asked, finally. He smoothed the rope as if it could iron his voice. "Next week will be kinder," he said. "The weather, the mood." "Next week," I repeated. No risks. I let his words sit between us until they cooled. In the afternoon, I printed the bolt photograph and slipped it into the ledger, paper against paper, record against record. I labeled the back in block letters like a schoolgirl, catwalk bent bolt before date time weather. Then I added a page, Sloane's list wide, hands, chin, profile, bolt detail, parent center, son back. I am not a detective, I told the kettle. I am a woman who has learned to keep receipts. When Leon came in, I handed him tea and set my palm lightly on his chest, over the heart that had kept a lighthouse alive while our family went unlit. We will choose the weather, I said. And I will choose the truth. He nodded, a small one, the kind a man gives when none of his choices are good. Numbers keep me steady while the wind invents excuses. At breakfast, I set out bowls, spoons, and the kind of calm that makes wolves blink. Leon shuffled in with the windbreaker he trusts, blue as a harbor at noon, and I hugged him as if we were simply cold. My hand slipped inside the chest pocket and left a pebble of purpose there, a mini recorder no larger than a matchbox. I had tested it twice with the kettle and the clock. The red dot pulsed when it heard my breath. Now it settled between fabric and beating, a new heart riding on the old one. I pressed my palm flat to feel it and said, "Wear this today." He nodded, half listening, because men who keep towers alive learn to keep worries quiet. On the table lay 2 phones and a printed forecast that tried to be reasonable. Wind building by afternoon, gusts 30, rain squalls. Any islander would call that a no. Julian had texted at dawn, "Stormlight is cinematic, trust me." Sloane had answered with 3 wind emojis and the word texture. I screenshotted the forecast and the thread and tucked the paper copy into my apron the way my mother once tucked a Psalms clipping when she feared a crossing. If a thing must later be believed, give it dates and numbers. Rules, I said, pouring tea. No rails. We stay together. We postpone if the weather turns. Leon looked up, tired and grateful. Agreed. The door opened on cue and brought Julian's confident whistle. He carried a black duffel that smelled of new plastic and optimism. Sloane trailed him with a ring light clipped to her pocket, as if the sun had applied for a demotion. "Gear day," Julian grinned, unzipping. A brand new harness unfurled across the chair like a seatbelt's cousin, bright webbing, dangling tags, the word "Pro" stamped on the buckles, as if safety were a brand you could purchase. He reached for the scissors in the crock. Leon, trying to be useful, said, "Use the marlin spike, and fetch the old tool from the hook by the back door." The marlin spike was a narrow iron wedge with a wood handle worn smooth by years of knotted line. Julian took it with a flourish, slid the point under the nylon loop, and flicked the tags free. Sloane, documenting everything, lifted her phone for a behind the scenes, catching Julian's left hand gripping the spike like a dagger while his right displayed the harness toward me. "Candid," she sang. I smiled without teeth and, quietly, took a photo of the photo. Later someone might need to see which hand held what. "Breakfast?" I asked. Sloane declined with the bright apology of people who believe hunger makes them lighter on film. Julian ate 2 bowls and licked the spoon like the boy who used to do homework at this table. "This will be quick," he promised between bites. "We'll stick to the middle. Sloane has a shot list." She waggled her phone. On the screen I read, "Wide of catwalk, hands on rail, kiss with horizon." The word kiss made my jaw lock. "We said no rails," I reminded them. "And I kiss my husband where stone does not keep score." They produced a compromise that was not a compromise. "Hands near rail, not on," Sloane said, already editing reality. "A hint of support reads as safe." "Words read as safe too," I answered. "Let's use those." Leon tugged on the windbreaker and patted the chest pocket, a habit so old he didn't notice me noticing. "We can call it if the gusts pick up," he said. "We'll turn around and try on a calmer day." "Good," I said. I wanted a spoken record. Words, like bolts, should be torqued to spec. The drive to the headland took 12 minutes and my lifetime. The sky wore a bruise that hadn't decided where to bloom. On the way, Julian kept up a gentle commentary about angles and exposure, a tour guide for the Church of Optics. Twice he reached for the radio, and twice I turned it off, honoring the old superstitions about music and heights. At the gate, The wind pressed its cold belly against us and sniffed our pockets. Sloane laughed at a spray of sand that jumped the path and announced, "Texture." The rain waited, thoughtful, combing the horizon with gray fingers. We paused before the catwalk to run the rules, as if rules had veto power. "No rails," I said. "Together," Leon added. "Postpone if the weather turns," I finished. "Copy," Julian said, glancing past us at the lantern room, measuring the distance like a contractor who has already ordered materials. Sloane's phone pinged. She looked and nodded to herself, then typed a line I assumed was to her shot list, open with wide. "Build to hands. Finish with kiss." She tucked the phone into her sleeve, a magician hiding a dove. We stepped onto the steel grating. The sea slapped the rocks with an exaggerated politeness, as if to say we are civilized here until we aren't. I felt the catwalk's old bones vibrate, a hum underfoot that used to soothe me. Today it spelled something else. Sloane walked backward a few paces, framing us with her lens. "Step back one more, let the sea halo you," she called, voice gummy with delight. I listened for the click that keeps photographers honest, and heard only wind. She adjusted the ring light against a sky that had more God in it than any gadget. The light died in the weather like a moth. Halfway out, the first squall shouldered in without grace. It barreled down the channel and slapped Sloane full in the face. She sputtered, shrieked, and then laughed for real, wiping her eyes with the cuff of a jacket too pretty for the job. For 5 seconds we were 4 foolish people on a wet bridge. Startled, equal, ridiculous. I laughed too, because bodies trade tension for whatever is at hand. Leon touched my elbow and smiled, and I forgot briefly that the recorder was listening from his breast pocket like a sober friend. "False alarm," Julian said, grinning, and rapped the rail with his knuckles, a knock I wanted to answer with a hammer. "See? Solid." The metal knocked back, not offended but not persuaded. We moved on, a cluster the wind could weigh. I counted bolts like beads and paused at the bent one, my bent one, the one that had leaned toward the sea before any of us learned to lie. "We'll avoid that rail," Sloane chirped, crouching to photograph it again, her lens drinking the serial number and the bow like a draft for later. "Don't memorialize the weakness," I said. "Memorialize our rules," she winked, which in her dialect meant no. We reached the midpoint, where a step either way feels like a decision heaven might notice. Sloane spread her feet, polished her smile, and began to move us as if we were furniture. "Parent center," she said. "Leon left of Amara. Chin up, eyes horizon." She lifted the camera. Julian slid behind me and placed his right hand on the safe part of the rail, palm out, the pose of a lifeguard in a brochure. His left hand hovered a breath from my spine. I felt it the way a cat feels a hawk's shadow. Leon inhaled to speak, and I saw his mouth form the beginning of a word, wait, without air to carry it. The camera still didn't click. Sloane's eyes were on the frame lines, not on us. "Beautiful," she murmured. Another inch back. The sea leaned in to hear our answer. I tasted iron that wasn't blood yet. My brain set one foot down on the word no, and the other on the word later, which is how humans fall. Julian's left hand tightened into readiness, and the wind began to clap. "Now," he said under his breath, the way men speak before lifting something heavy, and the world contracted to the pressure between his palm and my spine. When it came, it was not a shove the way cartoons draw it. It was a guided correction, a physics lesson taught by someone who thinks family excuses momentum. His palm pressed, his shoulder drove, his right hand pushed Leon's sleeve with 2 fingers, and Sloane's mouth made a small O that could pass on video for surprise. The catwalk slid out from under my feet like a bad promise. For a keen second I saw the rusted bolt, the stitched seam on Leon's pocket, Sloane's lens reflecting my own open mouth. We did not tumble into legend. We dropped the height of a confession onto a tidal shelf the sea had laid down like a trap and forgotten. Stone rose up faster than fear could finish its sentence. The shelf caught us and knocked the bells in every bone. I remember cold, a light smashed into salt spray, and the absurd thought that I had not turned off the kettle. Leon's cry was a torn sheet. Mine had no sound. Water leapt and clapped again, congratulating gravity for a job that looked tidy at a distance. My body begged to scream. I chose to live. Leon's hand groped across rock, found my sleeve, and dragged our elbows in under a lip of stone that broke the wind. The shelf tilted just enough to threaten and not enough to finish. Above, shapes moved against the gray. Sloane, kneeling, Julian, crawling, both smaller suddenly, both swearing in voices that tried to be whispers and failed. "Are they?" Sloane panted. "Don't look," Julian hissed. "We say the bolt failed, stick to it." Her head bobbed as if agreement were a habit. "We rehearsed this. Move." The words slid down with the spray and landed beside us. I put my cheek to the rock and felt its old heat hiding under the cold like a secret. Leon's mouth found my ear. "Go limp," he rasped, breath torn, voice full of 30 years of storms. "Play dead." The recorder listened from his chest as if it had been waiting its whole small life to hear that line, to catch the script we were not meant to know. I loosened every muscle the way you do when you accept an X-ray, and I let my breath thin to threads. The rock did its best impression of hospital sheets. "You pushed too hard," Sloane accused, voice high and bright. "We were supposed to—" "Shut up," Julian snapped, then softened, switching to a careful rhythm. "Loose rail, gust, tragic, we called it in." He peered over the edge, eyes skittering like gulls. "They're not moving." He swallowed and added, almost tender, "Good." Sloane's laugh hiccuped, fearful and thrilled, a sound I had only heard in movies. Rain arrived then, deciding the deliberations were over. It stitched the air between us with cold thread. I watched a drop find the seam of Leon's pocket and trembled for the recorder, that brave pebble with the red ear. He understood the thought and pressed his chest closer to the windbreaker's flap. "Still on," he breathed, so quietly only the stone and I could hear. We lay like wreckage, while above us they reorganized their choreography into grief. "We need a photo," Sloane whispered. "No," Julian said. "We don't risk the phone slipping. We need to move uphill. Get signal. Call." He said call like a magic trick. Sloane slid backward on her seat, her boots squealing against wet steel. "What if someone—" "There's no one," he said. "Storm keeps the paths empty. Come on." Their shapes shrank as they clawed toward the landward side, voices dwindling into the fuss of weather. Leon and I did not move. We let cold audition for the part of death. I counted 1 tied breath, 2 tied breaths until the song in my ears steadied. "If we live," I whispered into the granite, barely cutting the air. "I tell it all." Leon's hand squeezed mine, a slow Morse code. "If we die," he answered. "The recorder does." The sea kept its counsel. The lighthouse, blind by day, stood there like a judge with his eyes closed, listening for honesty. Minutes stretched into weather. Above us, I heard the scrape of boots, a clank of chain, Sloane whining, "My knee." Julian answering with an oath and a pep talk, the 2 voices adjusting their pitch for the roles they intended to play. Farther inland, the wind made a congregation of the pines, and they swayed like parishioners. I stared at a starfish stranded by the spray, its 5 arms hugging the rock as if to teach me posture. "We are not dead," I told it with the quiet of a librarian. "We are collecting." Sloane's voice floated back once more, brittle with purpose. "We open with me crying. You help me stand. You point to the rail, the bent bolt. Don't say bolt," Julian snapped. "Say railing." "Right," she said. "Railing. Loose. Gust. Tragic." She practiced tragic like a vowel. The recorder drank it, polite, undramatic, truthful by design. When the last scuff faded, Leon let out a shiver that was also a laugh, the kind that comes when the ship misses the rock by a yard. "Still with me," he said, not a question. I blinked once, our old code for yes. He pressed his forehead to the stone. "We wait," he said. "We let help think what it needs to think. We play dead until we are allowed to live." I pictured Kiri's steady hands without knowing her name yet. I pictured a detective taking a plastic bag from a pocket and saying chain of custody like a promise. I pictured Julian trying to remember which version of the story he had told first. Rain stitched my hair to my face, needlework done by a drunk ant. I let it. Cold as an alibi you can wear without makeup. Somewhere above, a gull laughed like a small god with a mean joke. I would laugh later, when laughter meant choosing not to drown on dry land. For now, I let the storm be our curtain, and I lay still with the woman I am, when I am not afraid. Rain needles the rock while the catwalk hums above us like a wire remembering music. Leon's breath saws close to my ear. We lie pinned to the tidal shelf, salt in our mouths, pretending that cold is all we are. Upslope, footsteps scrape, slide, regroup. Sloane's voice, bright with calculation, floats down in rehearsed fragments, gust, loose rail, tragic photo. Julian answers with the cadence of a foreman. Stick to it. Move. We call. We tried. Their words stitch a shroud they think already fits. I keep my face turned to the stone and count the seconds between their lines, letting fear drain off like water. I lean my lips toward the seam of Leon's collar and give our vow shape. If we live, I tell it all. His hand tightens on mine, knuckles slick, and he answers in a whisper meant for granite. If we die, the recorder does. Above, their story gathers props. He places the blame on wind. She practices tears. They choose an angle that flatters innocence. Control is a costume, and for a moment it seems tailored to them. They own the high ground, the cell signal, the first chance to speak to whoever arrives with ropes and radios. But the small red ear in Leon's pocket doesn't care about altitude. It keeps listening, exact as tide tables, impartial as an engineer. It captures the timeline they think they are controlling. The coaching, the rehearsal, the slip of pronouns, the comfort with lies. The shelf under us, hard as fact, becomes an archive. We wait until their noises fade into weather. The lighthouse stands above us, blind by day, yet it feels like a witness that refuses to blink. Leon's shoulder shakes once, from pain or laughter I cannot tell. I let my breath thicken a fraction, testing my return to life. For now I stay limp, obedient to our plan. They think the story belongs to them. It doesn't. It belongs to the record, and to the pulse that proves we are not done. And the sea keeps time, steady, patient, indifferent to lies. Sirens unstitched the storm. A rotor thumped the air into order while orange helmets dotted the edge above like bright barnacles. Ropes came hissing down, and with them voices pitched to certainty. Two below, copy two below. Metal rattled, canvas smacked, boots chewed steel. The world I knew, quiet, stubborn salt, was suddenly crowded with gear that believed in itself. A winchman dropped to the shelf and knelt so close I could see salt drying in the seam of his glove. "Ma'am?" he said, breath steady in the wind. I gave him nothing but a pulse he could claim. Leon kept his chest angled to shield the windbreaker's pocket, the small red ear listening like a miracle that refused attention. Above us, Julian played dutiful son to an audience he thought needed one. He hugged an EMT with both arms, a performance of relief so polished that for a moment I hated my own skepticism. "They're down there, please, my parents," his voice cracked on command. Sloane dabbed at her eyes, already red by strategy or spray. "It was the wind," she managed. The rail loose he tried to grab. She tripped on bolt, corrected to railing, and looked grateful to herself. Straps slid under us, plastic cradles clicked, and the winch began to haul. Sky swung, spray applauded. I felt the shelf let go and the line take over, and I kept my face slack, the way you do when you don't want an actor to see you watching the wrong play. On the rim, a Coast Guard petty officer logged times and positions without adjectives. The storm gave him punctuation. They lifted me first. The moment my stretcher cleared the lip, Julian bent into frame. "Mom?" he whispered. "Public enough for witnesses, private enough for poison." He pressed his forehead to mine as if giving blessing. Sloane hovered, hand to mouth, a portrait of sorrow. The EMT blocked the camera phone she pretended not to hold. "Give us room," he said evenly. "She's critical." Blue plastic curtains swallowed me. Heat leaned into my bones. Hands moved in practiced choreography. Scissors through sleeve, pressure at ankle, a cuff snugging my arm. The curtain breathed with the air handler's sigh. A nurse with calm wrists and sea-dark eyes appeared at my shoulder and adjusted my oxygen with a tenderness that felt like competence. Her badge read, "Kiri Anand, RRT." "Auntie," she said, and the island lived in the word. "If you can hear me, keep breathing slow. I've got you." Her palm warmed mine. I moved my index finger once, the smallest rebellion. Kiri's eyes flicked to my hand, then to my face, and I saw the part of her that had learned to notice the thing no one tells you to notice. The curtain whispered open. 2 minutes, a staffer said. Family can say a few words. Julian slid in, shoulders rounded by this sudden grief. Sloane came to the other side, mascara telling a story, her voice backed up. Kiri stayed, a guardian masquerading as a monitor. Julian bent so close I could smell the cedar of his barber and the coffee he'd used to sweeten panic. His mouth found my ear. If you'd signed, he breathed, soft as a prayer. None of this like Nia would have had to happen. The sentence landed like cold iron. Sloane's inhale snagged on the name. Kiri froze, eyes lifting, the way a deer hears the twig that matters. My finger pressed the sheet once in answer to myself. Recorded, witnessed. Kiri's hand tightened, then loosened. She reached for the pulse ox with a neutral face and quietly adjusted nothing. To me, under her breath, she said, "If you're not safe with them, move your finger 3 times." I moved it. 1, 2, 3, the smallest SOS. Kiri nodded, as if a private switch flipped on inside her. "Understood," she murmured, and the word felt like a bridge being lowered. They were ushered out. The detective came in the way weather comes, already present, quietly. Mid-50s, clean raincoat, eyes that had watched too many people decide between stories and truth. He introduced himself low. The name didn't stick, the cadence did. He spoke to Kiri first, respectful, crisp, then to me. "Mrs. D'Souza, only answer what you can safely. Do you have anything in your possession we should secure?" Leon's stretcher rolled into the next bay. I heard his breath take inventory of pain and find enough room for purpose. "His jacket," I rasped. "Chest pocket." Kiri tipped her chin. Within a minute the detective was gloving up and easing the recorder into an evidence bag, the zip sound like a ribbon pulled from a box. "Time date," he said to the tech. "Witnessed recovery from patient's garment. Continuous chain." He didn't look at me when he said chain of custody, but the words steadied me like a handrail that had passed inspection. A doctor with a braid secured my arm in a bright foam cradle and said words meant to reassure. "Contusions, probable rib fracture, concussion watch." Through the curtain I heard Sloane rehearse tragedy again for a different ear, adding adjectives now that she had an audience with a clipboard. "The view was so beautiful," she told someone. "He, my father-in-law," he stepped back for the photo, "and the wind." The sentence tried out poses. None of them were truth. They wheeled me to imaging and back. Each ceiling tile learned my name. When we paused in a quiet family room between scans, Leon and I were parked side by side, 2 surrendered boats. The door clicked, soft as a throat clearing, and Kiri stood guard for a moment, then pulled it closed. "You've got 5 minutes," she said. "I'll be right outside." Leon turned his head and found me. Salt ringed his lashes. "I didn't save her," he said, voice the scrape of rope over cleat. "Let me help save you now." The room contracted to his eyes, old news blue. "Tell me," I said. "All of it." He stared at the linoleum as if tide maps might appear there and show a channel none of us had used. "The night Nia died," he began, and the world split along that seam again. I followed them to the ferry ramp because their voices were wrong. She had papers, our bank withdrawals she didn't recognize. She said his name like a full stop. Julian tried the old smile. "She didn't buy it." He swallowed. He shoved her. Deliberate. Not a stumble, not a gust. She went back fast. Her head struck the piling. I got to the edge and, his hands, opened, empty. The current took her where I couldn't follow. Silence in the family room learned a new density. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, and my voice didn't shake, which surprised me enough to breathe. He stared at his hands. "Because I was a coward who thought he was a father," he said. "Because one child was already dead, and the other was begging. Because I told myself I could keep us together by living with a lie." He let the words sit in the air until they forced their own weight to show. "I called it misadventure. I let the coroner call it that too. I made an altar to that word. I prayed at it every day. Pain rose, old and new, married by the same officiant. I let it stand. And the envelopes? I asked. Harbor Cask Holdings? He nodded once, ashamed. A shell. He said it was temporary, a way to route maintenance. I watched the trickle and told myself a trickle wasn't a theft. I told myself if I confronted him I'd have to confess the first sin, the worst one. He looked at me then, the way a lighthouse looks at a storm in daylight. Blind, responsible anyway. I failed, Nia. I failed you. All I can do now is help the truth happen. Someone knocked and opened the door a hand's width. The detective slid in with a clipboard and a respectful distance. I won't take long, he said. Mrs. D'Souza, Mr. D'Souza. The audio contains substantial material. We'll authenticate it. A nurse. He glanced toward the hall where Kiri's shadow held steady. Overheard a statement from your son of evidentiary value. He met my eyes. I'm going to ask you something simple. Do you feel safe if those two are allowed back in here? No, I said. I do not. My voice found gravel and was grateful. They killed one child. Today they came back for our lives. Writing caught up to speech. The detective's pen moved like a small boat learning a current. Understood, he said. We'll restrict access and post an officer. He paused. We also have the Coast Guard's winch log. Times line up with what our rescuers observed. We'll collect the forecast printouts you made and the messages about stormlight. Those matter. Kiri reappeared, a cup of water held at the dignified angle of a sacrament. She set it within reach, then straightened. I can testify to what I heard, she said, to the room, to the future. I'll also document the finger signals. She didn't add the word safety. She didn't have to. It hung there, rehabilitated from the mouth that had used it to mean control. A chaplain wandered past the door and, seeing no invitation, kept going. The hospital has its own weather systems, grief fronts, ethics thermals, alarms like lightning that never strike the same place twice. I lay still and catalogued what we had gathered in the gale. Audio. A nurse who could tell a judge what a whisper said. A log of ropes and minutes that could not be persuaded. A forecast with wind the color of intent. My body, loud with bruises, quietly living. Julian and Sloane tried 3 more times to breach the curtain, each attempt wrapped in fresh sorrow. We just need closure, she declared to the ward clerk, as if the word were a master key. An officer stepped from nowhere and became a hinge that would not swing. Through plastic, I heard Julian call a payday lender and speak in a code that wasn't coded at all. A week, he promised. Something's moving. The detective listened, without pretending not to. Toward midnight, when monitors softened their beeping and the floor learned to whisper, Leon reached for me again. I was the keeper of a light, he said, eyes on the scuffed toe of his boot. And I let our home be dark. You did, I said, because the truth is a door best not opened with euphemism. He winced, then nodded. Then let me help switch it on now. I turned my head so the pillow carried the words the recorder would no longer need. We will tell it all, I said. In public, in daylight, for her. Nia's name didn't crack me, it steadied me, as if speaking it put her hand back in mine for a moment so brief even grief couldn't measure it. The storm outside moved on to frighten other roofs. The hospital settled around us like a ship that has found the right tack. Kiri came one more time before dawn, adjusted a line, and bent close. You're safe here, she said. I'll be on at 7 again. I squeezed her fingers. Thank you. The detective, leaving, tapped the evidence bag once with 2 fingers. Nothing theatrical, just the way sailors tap a hull before trusting it. We'll keep the record intact, he said. Let the actors act. We have tape. He allowed himself half a smile. Rest. Tomorrow is work. I watched the blue plastic breathe and thought of our house, of ledgers that tell clean truths, of a lighthouse blink that survived becoming a courtesy. Loss had arrived and unpacked its luggage all over the floor. But it hadn't taken the one thing that changes endings. We had witnesses now, human, mechanical, maritime. We had the shape of a story that would not wear anyone's costume. And for the first time in 25 years, the dark we lived with felt scared of the morning. Night in the hospital is a hall of small machines. Each monitor keeps time like a choir that never sleeps. The blue curtain breathes. The floor shines the way water shines when there is no moon. I lie still and let the beeps divide the dark. With each metronome I remember Nia, paint on her knuckles, salt in her hair, a laugh that threw open our staircase. Memory hurts, but it keeps shape. I hold to that. Honest legacy, I tell myself, is the work we do after we stop pretending. The room agrees by remaining plain and bright tonight. Leon sleeps in fits, then starts awake and reaches for me. The nurse adjusts my blanket and smiles the way people do when they are tired but useful. Near dawn, the detective returns, raincoat folded over his arm. He sits, not too close, and updates me softly. They traced Harbor Cask Holdings through 2 local banks to a lender on the mainland. The emails read like weather alerts. Past due, escalate, demand letter. He shows me printed copies. Names are blacked, amounts are not. I imagine Julian promising weeks that never came, trading our roof for temporary quiet at night. He explains the next steps in a voice stripped of drama. Subpoenas for account statements, preservation letters to phone carriers, a warrant for the camera that holds Sloane's scouting images, an engineer for the catwalk, a document examiner for the drafts. I refused. I nod until the beeps slip back into hearing. He asks if I want a chaplain. I ask for Kiri. The detective smiles, surprised by his own relief at the name. Later she stands by my bed and checks my oxygen line like a violinist tuning a string. She asks if I have eaten. I have not. By evening, we are home. The house smells of bleach and rain. Harriet stocked the fridge and left a note that says, "Call if you forget how to breathe." Leon moves slow, protective of his ribs, stubborn about dignity. We sit at the kitchen table with tea and copies of the financials the detective left. The screen door clicks while the wind thinks. We do what we have always done when waves felt larger than the boat. We sort, label, and bind. Truth likes folders. We make it comfortable so it will stay. It has run enough already at last. Leon watches me measure the stack of lender emails with a ruler, an old habit from the choir office. He tries a smile. It does not know where to land. "Tell me again," I say, and he does. The ferry ramp, the papers in Nia's hand, the shove he cannot forget, the word he chose and fed for years, misadventure. When he finishes, I hold his wrist. If truth breaks them, it breaks along the lines already there. He nods, relief and grief quarreling behind his eyes. He pours more tea and adds honey like apology for his long silence. In the morning, the detective returns with a woman in a gray jacket who smells faintly of ink. She is the document examiner. She spreads the POA drafts on the table, crease by crease. She points with a capped pen. "Leftward slant on initials," she says. "Heavy entry strokes. Lateral drag on crossbars. These are signatures learned by a left-dominant writer. See the feathering at the end of D and S." She places a blank sheet beside them and demonstrates the way a left hand pulls lines. The copies tell the same story every time. His practice bleeds through anyway. She asks for known samples. Leon produces birthday cards Julian signed with his left hand, jaunty, slanted, proud. The examiner does not gloat. She circles, one flourish, and nods. "You can fake names," she says, "but you cannot fake pressure." She photographs each page and logs them in a binder with tabs. The detective watches the work as if patience were proof. When they leave, the table smells of paper and a little like victory. I do not trust victory yet. I put the drafts back in their envelope so the chain remains clean. The quiet feels earned but fragile. At the lawyer's office, I request a new appointment and arrive with Harriet, who carries a tote like a shield. The lawyer performs concern and asks how we are coping. He mentions settlement in the way people mention weather. "There is a path," he says, "that avoids a public fight." Harriet taps the table with one finger. "Be certain or be silent. You can't be both." He blinks. I open my notebook and make a column called plea and a column called trial. Under plea, I write quiet, shorter. Under trial, I write record, daylight, Nia, and my own name. The lawyer lists risks as if he were reading ingredients. Public attention, cross-examination, children in the middle. He offers the shape of a deal that would spare the grandchildren the camera eye and promises a sentence that still feels heavy. I imagine their faces in a waiting room that smells like disinfectant and fear. Then I imagine a future where the story is a rumor we never corrected. My throat chooses for me. Then I'll be certain and loud. The pen stops hovering. Even the walls seem to exhale. We ask for referrals to child services right away, please. Back in the kitchen, Harriet produces her own plant. She saw Sloane's shot list on our counter 2 days before the fall. She can describe it without notes: wide, hands on rail, chin up, profile, bolt detail, parents center, sun back. She signs a statement and staples her name to that memory. Leon looks as if someone opened a window in a sealed room. I scan the list she writes from recall and match it to the photograph I took. It is the same song sung by a different voice. The rhyme is what matters. Courts understand patterns like this. We meet a social worker with hands like dictionaries. She writes the names of the grandchildren carefully, then ours, then a plan for the days ahead. Temporary care with a neighbor trusted by everyone. Supervised visits only. Trauma support. She asks if we can attend an intake in the morning. We can. When she leaves, she pats the doorframe the way captains pat hulls. The detective arrives with printed lender emails approved for disclosure. They smell of toner and dread. The subject lines beg without elegance. Final notice. Immediate action required. There is nothing literary about debt, only hungry arithmetic. Night returns with its clean beeping logic. Leon dozes in the chair because beds feel like permission he has not earned. I review the Coast Guard winch log, the times logged by an impartial pen, and feel steadier. The phone buzzes with a message from the lawyer. The prosecutor is open to a plea if we prefer privacy. I sit very still and listen for Nia as if memory could step into the room. She does not. She has color and salt and a refusal to be framed. I text back, "We want a public record for her and us." The next day, we sign releases and watch the detective copy our photos, messages, and notes onto labeled drives. He is methodical without cruelty. "This is the moment," he says, "when stories stop moving." He thanks Harriet for her statement and schedules her for an interview. She brings muffins and moral clarity. At the end, she squeezes my hand. "You'll shake," she says, "shake in the light." Leon, who hates speaking in public, looks like a man building a stage he plans to run from. I touch his arm. "We don't run anymore," I tell him. "We stand and speak." In the lawyer's conference room, we practice testimony like people practicing fire drills. He plays the skeptic and asks why we chose a storm. I show him the forecast I printed and the thread where Julian wrote cinematic light. He asks why we did not refuse the photo. I say control is not a light switch. Families dim truth by degrees. He asks what I want from a jury. I say a record with a spine. He asks what I fear. I say forgetting. He nods and finally looks human. He says we are ready. We sign witness availability forms. That night I stand at the sink and watch the window darken until it gives me my face back. I think of the girl who painted signs on birthdays and of the man who kept a light alive while his house went dim. Grief has stopped trying to trick me. It walks beside me and carries a corner of the box. I open the back door and let the wind come through. "For the record," I say into the yard, "we choose daylight." The house hears me. The sea hears me. Somewhere, the tower nods. We sleep without borrowed stories. The detective wheeled in a corkboard taller than Leon and studded it with pins the color of stoplights. "This is where stories stop improvising," he said, sliding plastic sleeves under clips until the board looked like a map of a coastline only we recognized. The wind rattled the hospital windows like gossip pressing its face to the glass. Kiri stood beside me with a coffee she claimed she didn't need. Leon sat bolt upright despite his ribs, jaw set like a cleat. First went up the audio, a waveform printed on glossy paper, valleys and peaks annotated in neat block letters. We say the bolt failed, stick to it. We rehearsed this. "Move." The detective tapped each label with a capped pen, an usher pointing to pews. Then came the metadata. Sloane's scouting trips plotted on a map in tidy dots, each dot dated and timed down to the minute. 3 separate visits in the week before the fall," he said. "All geotagged at Blackcap. 2 at the catwalk, 1 at the base plate." Kiri's mouth tightened, respect refusing to disguise anger. Next, my bent bolt photo slotted in at eye level, before stamped across the border in letters even a storm would obey. A printout from an insurance engineer leaned against it. Cosmetic deformation, no structural compromise. Below that, the marlinspike photo, Julian's left hand holding the iron, tags dangling from the just-cut harness glared like a small, undeniable sundae. "We'll recover the tool," the detective said. "But for optics, this is sufficient." Leon nodded once, as if relieved to see his own shame become evidence instead of poison. The Coast Guard log snapped onto the board with a bark of metal. Winch start, 15 to 22. First patient over the lip, 15:31. Second, 15:38. The detective read. Crewman Carter will testify to Mr. D'Souza coaching the gust. Loose railing, tragic photo line at 15:42. Carter, a man built like a buoy with the patience of a lighthouse keeper, raised a hand from the doorway. "I'll say exactly what I heard," he promised, as if the sea itself had hired him. A column of lender emails followed. Subject, final notice. Subject, immediate action required printed, so the jury could see how hunger looks when it learns punctuation. Then the POA slant analysis. Circles and arrows where the examiner had marked leftward pressure, heavy entry strokes, feathered exits. She had signed her report in blue ink with a right-hand flourish that looked like a reprimand. Harriet's sworn statement lay on the table, describing Sloane's shot list she'd seen days before. Wide, hands on rail, chin up, profile, bolt detail, parent center, sun, back. The rhyme of it echoed under the fluorescence. "Truth will be read into the record," the detective said, taking a breath as if he were about to jump from a cold rock. "Today we take custody of the first reading." He held up 2 warrants, judge's signature shining like a distant lighthouse blink, one for Julian, one for Sloane. Kiri touched my sleeve. "You'll hear it before you see it," she whispered. The air changes when the room realizes it has to behave. We move to the hospital's main corridor where everything echoes. Announcements about visiting hours, heels, plastic wheels, whispers. A strip of afternoon sun unraveled across the linoleum like ribbon that didn't know it had been cut. Visitors leaned against vending machines, scanning phones for news they would later claim they didn't want. The island had already split into competing hymns, poor boy pushed too far against. They planned it like a movie, and both choirs lurked in the hall now, pretending to read signs about hand hygiene. Leon stood slightly behind me, a habit of protection that still works even when protection failed. The detective stationed 2 officers by the elevators and another near the family room door. Body cams blinked red, polite, and hungry. Kiri drifted to my side and folded her arms, a lighthouse in scrubs. Carter joined the knot of uniforms, his posture saying he could catch someone falling even if the floor remained where floors belong. The elevator chimed. There they were, arm in arm, faces arranged like flowers that had been told the camera would love them. Sloane's mascara had decided to survive. Julian's jaw had been shaved into confidence. He scanned the hall and found me, let surprise rush across his face like a stage direction, sees mother alive, soften, widen eyes. "Mom," he said, soft enough to make strangers want to help him. "They said we could visit." The detective stepped forward. Voice issued from that sacred compartment where bureaucracy becomes judgment. "Julian D'Souza, Sloane Hart murder of Nia D'Souza, attempted murders of Amara and Leon D'Souza." The words did not echo. They landed and stayed. He turned them gently, the way you turn a heavy thing so it sits right. "You're under arrest." For a beat, nothing moved. Then everything did. Sloane's hand flew to her mouth, then to Julian's sleeve, then to the air as if it could pull down a different sky. "We're the victims," she cried, voice brittle as sugar. "It was an accident. We tried to save them." One of the officers lifted a palm, not to silence, but to steady the scene for the camera. Body cams blinked, patient as tide. Julian's shock looked rehearsed until it cracked on a word he hadn't planned. "That's impossible," he said to the detective, to me, to himself. "We saw—" He stopped just before dead. The detective didn't smile, but the air did. The officer read rights in a measured tone, unstartled by beautiful people deciding to be ordinary. A volunteer at the chapel door crossed herself, then remembered she was not supposed to pick sides. Sloane broke first, as if someone had tapped a flawed glass. "It was his idea," she said, voice climbing a ladder too quickly. I told him not to, we only went because he—" She pointed at Julian with a hand that wanted to be clean. He snapped, a reflex faster than thought. You scouted at your list. The corridor inhaled as one organism. A baby started to cry in a waiting room 3 doors down. Kiri's mouth flattened into a line that meant, keep going, give us more. They spun toward each other, 2 dancers who suddenly remembered they hate the music. You said wind makes it cinematic, Sloane hissed. You said bring the harness. You wanted the house, Julian threw back. You took the bolt photo. You wrote parents center, son back. The detective lifted a hand as if stopping traffic no one could see. Thank you, he said softly, almost kindly. Body cams are rolling. Visitors had become witnesses without permission. Later, in depositions, they would describe posture, tone, the way Sloane kept touching her face as if grief were something you could smear on, the way Julian's eyes kept bouncing between me and the door, as if he could still edit this. Carter, at my shoulder, murmured just loud enough for the mic. Same voices, same rhythm, same script. The corridor seemed to nod along. Reporters arrived the way seaweed arrives. All at once, stealthy, tangled with things you can't use. They hovered beyond the taped line, murmuring to lenses, building sentences that would later be trimmed. One called my name, as if we were old friends. I did not look. Debate is a tide that drags you off your feet. I am done waiting where there are rip currents. When someone asked whether I had anything to say, I said, we'll speak in court. Kiri's hand found the small of my back, steady as ballast. The detective began the choreography of custody. Evidence bags were checked against a list. A sergeant verified warrant numbers as if confirming the birthdays of his children. Sloane tried to turn toward me, perhaps to throw a rope made of apology. I did not catch it. She pivoted to the reporter nearest the line. They're lying, she said, sputtering like a candle. They staged this. They're trying to steal our kids. The reporter blinked and left the sentence there like a fish flapping on concrete. Truth will be read into the record, the detective reminded the corridor, a gentle rebuke to the idea that rooms decide outcomes. He gestured to the officers, who stepped forward without hurry. The cuffs sounded like 2 coins acknowledging a debt. Julian looked at me, eyes suddenly very young. Mom, he said, soft, a rope thrown out of habit. You know me. I felt the floor, the wall, the years. I do, I said. And I know Nia. He flinched like a man who has just learned what a name weighs. A woman from the gift shop, apron still on, whispered to the volunteer at the chapel door, poor boy, and the volunteer whispered back, poor girl. And somewhere between them the island kept dividing itself like a cell, silently, inevitably. Harriet arrived with a thermos and a look I have seen stop fights at fish fries. She stood beside Leon and me and stared at Sloane, until Sloane the performer remembered she was someone's audience too. You saw the list, Sloane blurted, reaching for Harriet's memory the way a drowning person reaches for a reed. Harriet lifted her chin. I saw enough to testify. As the elevator doors opened to swallow the pair, Julian twisted toward the detective. This is a mistake, he tried again. A gust. We have the weather, the detective said. We have your texts requesting stormlight. We have your geotags. We have her list. We have your whisper in the ER. He did not add, we have our eyes. He didn't need to. The body cams captured the calibration of his tone, respectful, final. Sloane's voice thinned as the doors began to close. You can't do this, she told the officers, and then, to the hall at large, you don't understand. The doors met like lips finishing a prayer. The corridor sagged, then pulled itself together, the way halls do when grief and relief argue about who pays for the coffee. The murmurs rose again. Someone dropped a cup. A janitor with perfect timing appeared with a mop and the serenity of a man who has survived 3 decades of drama in public places. Carter shook my hand with big, careful fingers. Ma'am, he said, we've got you. Kiri squeezed my shoulder, a small benediction. Eat something, she ordered. Shaking counts as cardio, but it doesn't count as dinner. Leon leaned toward me. It's loud, he said. The light. Let it be, I answered. We hid in the dark long enough. By evening, the island was a choir rehearsal nobody had called. The diner held a table of men who thought they understood storms, and another table of women who actually did. Phones lit laps like small altars. Someone posted a photo of the corridor, blurred faces, the detective's hand half raised, a caption that read, "It's happening." Someone else wrote that families should handle family in private. Underneath, Harriet replied with polite stiletto, "Truth belongs in daylight." The thread roped itself into knots of virtue and fear. I turned my phone face down the way you close a lid on a dish you're saving for later, maybe. At home, I pinned a copy of the warrants to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. The kitchen exhaled our poor kitchen, long-suffering absorber of theater. Leon washed 2 mugs at a pace that would not chip porcelain. "They looked like kids," he said. "They looked like actors who forgot the ending," I said. He nodded, accepting the kinder sentence I did not owe him. We sat at the table with the evidence copies and the DA's outline the detective had left. The board's logic now lived in handouts: audio, metadata, bolt, marlinspike, logs, lenders, POA. It read like a hymn in 7 parts. Before bed, I stood on the porch and listened to voices migrate across the street, softer now that the room had chosen its adults. A gull barked 3 times like laughter that changed its mind. Out beyond the last roofline, the lighthouse prepared for its ceremonial blink. I lifted a hand, not to wave, but to measure a distance that had finally become visible, the span between a story and a record, between grief done in private and justice done where anyone can stand and say they heard it too. In the morning, someone had chalked on the sidewalk beside our gate, "We're with you." Below it, a smaller hand had added, "For Nia." I bent as far as my bruises let me and touched the chalk with my fingertip. It came away pale and powdery, proof that light leaves residue. When the detective called to confirm we'd be at the arraignment, I said yes. "Bring your voice," he told me. "The island will bring theirs. We'll bring the tape." "No speeches in corridors," I said. "We'll speak in court." He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. "That's where it counts," he said. "And that's where the body cams sleep easy." The courtroom felt like a boat that never moved. Polished wood, air-conditioned chill, the tide of voices held outside by heavy doors. I sat with Leon at counsel table, a row of paper spines between us and the past. The jurors filed in with the careful faces people wear when they're asked to decide if winter happened. Julian watched them like a salesman judging credit, Sloane like a stylist hunting angles. I watched the clerk swear them, and I breathed with the metronome on the wall clock. In on tick, out on talk. When the judge entered, the room stood as one body remembering its bones. The state began with the sound that changed the weather. The tech dimmed the lights and projected a waveform, hills and troughs, each labeled in ink. Then the speakers gave us the moment again, wind and breath, and the human choice buried inside both. Sloane's voice, bright and thin. "We say the bolt failed, stick to it." Julian's voice, clipped and managerial. "We rehearsed this. Move." The jurors leaned forward the way people lean toward surf. The detective narrated the timestamps as if reading tide tables. I kept my palms pressed flat so I wouldn't try to hold the room still. Kiri went next. She stood straight in hospital blue and told the jury where she was and what she heard. She described the blue plastic curtain and the oxygen hiss, the way I moved one finger to answer a question. She whispered, "If you're not safe with them, move your finger 3 times." She held up 3 calm fingers. Then she repeated the sentence Julian breathed into my ear. "If you'd signed, none of this like Nia would have had to happen." The name hung above the counsel tables like a bell. Kiri did not dramatize it. She gave it weight and let it land. Metadata followed, as gentle and merciless as geometry. The state mapped Sloane's scouting trips, 3 dots at Blackcap, each with date and time, 1 pinned to the base plate photo, 2 at the catwalk. The bent bolt image came up beside my own before print. The insurance engineer testified that the curve was cosmetic, not structural. The defense tried to turn cosmetic into invisible. The engineer refused to learn that language. "It bent," he said, "but it did not fail." The photos were taken before the incident. The document examiner treated the drafts like an anatomy class. She showed left slanted initials, heavy entry strokes, feathered exits, and the way a left hand drags a crossbar when it hurries. She displayed birthday cards Julian had signed left dominant jaunty and overlaid the rhythm of those letters with the rhythm of the POA. "You can fake names," she told the jury. "You cannot fake pressure." The lender emails arrived like weather alerts. Final notice, escalate, demand. A banker traced Harbor Cask Holdings from our account to a hungry line of credit, then to a lender whose name sat in the air like a door you don't open at night. "Timeline," the prosecutor said, and the Coast Guard logs clicked into place. Winch start, 15:22. First patient over the lip, 15:31. Second, 15:38. Crewman Carter, steady, unhurried, described hearing, gust, loose railing, tragic photo while we were still wet on the stretcher. He did not color it. He put it on the table like a thing that did not need an introduction. Then they called me. I took the oath and said my name, and the room changed temperature by a single degree. I told it simply. The ledgers, the pressure, the wrong maiden name on the drafts, the shot list on the counter, the bent bolt that bowed before any story needed it, the push that didn't look like a shove until it was too late to rename it, the shelf that caught us, the whisper in the ER. I didn't make poetry. The facts already had their own music. The defense tried to sculpt fog. "Mrs. D'Souza, you agreed to a photo at the Lighthouse in storm conditions," the lawyer said, smiling like a gentle teacher. "Isn't it true you chose risk?" "We chose family," I answered. "They chose weather meant to help a lie." He asked if money troubles could make good people desperate. "Desperation buys groceries," I said. "It doesn't buy a script." He asked if grief can look like planning. "Planning looks like planning," I said, and the jurors watched my mouth decide the last word. Leon testified last for us. He told the truth he owed our house and the graveyard. He said Nia's name. He said misadventure, and then said the word he had avoided for 25 years, murder. He looked at Julian, and the room watched a father let go of a story that had been starving him. I felt the ache in the benches behind me, the way an island makes a sound when stone shifts under its oldest path. The defense's case was a handful of sand. Sloane cried cleanly and said she had only ever wanted safety. She called herself a victim of a man with debts. Julian said gust and accident and financial stress enough times that the syllables lost meaning. He looked down at the table when the audio played again. On cross, the prosecutor did not raise his voice. "Did you tell your mother, if you'd signed, none of this like Nia would have had to happen?" Silence accompanied him like an old friend. When Julian finally said, "I was distraught," the word sounded like a coat he had found on a bench and tried to pretend was his. In instructions, the judge leaned forward, fingers tented. He gave the jury the law like a map folded and unfolded until the creases knew their work. Then he said the line I will copy in my ledger and keep with the Lighthouse deed. "Truth is not revenge, it is record." The sentence filled the room with a kind of fresh air that doesn't always attend courts. We stood, and the jurors left, and time played its old game of stretching and snapping. The verdict arrived with shoes on. The foreperson stood, voice steady as a pier. On the charge of murder of Nia D'Souza, guilty. The room exhaled. On the charges of attempted murder of Amara and Leon D'Souza, guilty. Sloane's face folded first. Julian's went very still, which is one way some men fall apart. The prosecutor did not look at us. He looked at the jury and said thank you the way a person thanks sailors who brought a boat in with all hands. Sentencing came a week later, because the calendar belongs to rules we did not write. The judge measured words and years at the same time. He spoke of planning and of the public corridor where blame cracked its own mirror. He spoke of the recorder's uninterest in theater and of the shoreline that good paper can give surviving people. Then he sent them to cells that will be smaller than any of their performances. The numbers were long enough to outlive rage. After court, I touched the courthouse railing out of habit and did not think of bolts. We took the long way home, the road that skirts the harbor and lets the water check your face for lies. The house met us with its ordinary breath. Harriet set tea on the table and didn't ask if we had words left. We didn't. We drank and listened to the clock. Weeks later, on a still evening, the grandchildren came for the weekend. Their backpacks dropped like punctuation on the porch. We made paper kites at the kitchen table, Leon showing them how to anchor a tail with a shell bead. Out on the yard, the kites climbed the mild breeze in uneven sentences. "Higher," one shouted, as if sky were a knob. Leon laughed and steadied the string. "Light the tower, Mara," he said, meaning nothing literal. I lifted my cup toward the horizon. Blackcap blinked once, ceremonial and sufficient. When bedtime's stubbornness softened, we read in the old room that still smells like crayons. Before I turned out the light, I gave them the line I intend to give them again when they're old enough to ask for an uncut version. "This house tells the truth. So do we." They nodded with the solemn speed of children who have not yet learned to fake agreement. After their door clicked, I stood in the hall and let the quiet reintroduce itself with better manners. On the porch, Leon joined me with 2 blankets and the look of a man whose shoulders have learned a new posture. The harbor breathed. The island's gossip had slowed to a murmur useful only for weather. Across the water, the lighthouse blinked again, the polite old man clearing his throat. I thought of ledgers and lawyers and nurses and ropes and red lights that record. I thought of Nia as more than a name caught in a transcript, paint on her hands, salt in her hair, a laugh that could still find a staircase if we left one for it. We did not toast victory. We toasted the record. I lifted the cup and spoke to the air, the way islanders speak to fog. "For the ledger," I said. "For the light." Leon's hand found mine. The wind moved through the hydrangeas like a choir turning a page. We stood there until the blink happened once more, then went in to wash the cups, to set the kite strings where small hands could find them in the morning, to sleep in a house that had learned to keep itself honest. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart even a little, that's our greatest joy. If you'd like, please share your thoughts in the comments. We'll keep bringing you stories that stay with you, so please consider subscribing to the channel. See you in the next video.